A very warm welcome to all of you at your computer screens, to all of us here in New York and London. Thank you for tuning in today to our webinar on how to supply the healthcare sectors in the United States of America and the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. My name is Christian Kesberg. I'm the Austrian Trade Commissioner for the UK, der österreichische Wirtschaftsdelegierte für das Vereinigte Königreich. Before we dive into the subject, a few words about the white elephant, the pandemic situation here in the UK. During the first wave, Great Britain became, unfortunately, the European COVID-19 champion. Lots of reasons for that. Excess mortality, about 8 times as high as in Austria. Again, lots of reasons. An underfinanced health system with a lot of preconditions. Inequalities, social inequalities, income inequalities. The virus seeks out the poor and the uneducated, and of course, a high density of populations, which is about 4 times higher than in Austria. Because of the long and very broad sector lockdowns, the notorious V curve of economic development here is much more loop-sided than on the continent. It's steep down and up in a flat trajectory. The GDP of Great Britain probably will shrink this year by 10%, which unfavorably compares to the -7% bad enough predicted or forecasted for Austria. There is, of course, the entire mess here is compounded by the economic fallout of Britain's imminent exit from the European Union due on the 1st of January 2021. We have published extensively on this subject, but if you have worries, sorrows, and questions in regard to Brexit, please address them to us. We might not be able to take away the pain, but probably some of the uncertainty. The COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen, has pushed the world's healthcare system to the brink of their limits in the short term. However, the consequences have been specifically dramatic and persistent in the US and in the UK. In the United States, about 17% of GDP is spent on healthcare, but the fragmentation of the system and the extensive privatization of treatment and care services has led to fatal dysfunctions and inequalities. And in the UK, the virus had hit the capacity and quality bottlenecks of an exemplary, traditionally exemplary, but long underfinanced healthcare, universal entitlement healthcare system. The UK has already announced a big package of investments in infrastructure and equipment to make the National Health Service future-proof and pandemic safe. And in the United States, the pandemic has fueled, a long religious war about the reform of COVID unfit insurance and benefit systems. Both healthcare systems belong to the largest in the world and offer numerous opportunities for Austrian companies. But because of their size and because of their complexities, there are also a number of obstacles and hurdles to be overcome that need a strategic approach, homework and a strategic approach from a supplier. Today, with the help of 2 experts from both systems, we will try to give you a system overview. We'll try to talk a little bit about the procurement architecture, about market development, and of course, about business opportunities. Here in the UK today with us is John Wilkes. John is an old friend of mine, an old friend of the Austrian Trade Commission here in London. He has been here, he has been around for a long time. John is the founder of UK Health Gateway, a consultancy that helps manufacturers of medical devices and pharmaceuticals to enter the UK market. John and his team do a lot of things. They do distributor research, regulatory certification, market research, clinical trials, and of course they do PR for their clients and lobbying of government and clinical associations. UK Health Gateway also publishes the UK widest red e-letter for her health service personnel, and John is also the founder and the operator of a web-based thing that's called the Academy of Fabulous Stuff, a leading repository of best practice in health and social care. With that, John, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Christian. I have to say, after an introduction like that, I feel pressured that I really had better give the most fantastic presentation to you all this afternoon. And I want to say thank you very much, first of all, to Christian and the Austrian Trade Commission for inviting me, and also to all of you for tuning in this afternoon. Do please use the chat function if you have any questions as we go along. And I know that Christian, Daniel, and others will facilitate that at the end of my talk. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes and then open it up to Q&A, and I'll do my very best to answer as many questions as I can in the time available. I make no apology for the fact that my opening slide has a photograph of an intensive care unit, because it is clear that right now we are moving towards a second wave of the coronavirus, and there is no ducking away from that. The hospitals are under already the most intense pressure. They're trying different techniques this time around for managing patients who come in suffering from COVID, and they're also wrestling with the dilemma of how do they keep elective surgery, cancer diagnostics and treatment and so on, mental health and community services functioning properly so that patients who are not suffering from COVID can access those services properly. So let me try to take you through a quick status update. No question that a second wave is upon us. Only yesterday in England, the city and environment of Liverpool was placed into top tier status for a lockdown where nobody can move, nobody can see even close family relations outside of their own household. But I want to move beyond the fact that we've got this second wave and try to paint a picture of the opportunities and knowledge that you need to have if you're sitting at your desk in Vienna or Salzburg or elsewhere, so that you understand the landscape into which you're going to be trying to sell your products. First of all, we have a lot of exhausted staff, and I don't just mean frontline clinical staff. I also mean behind the scenes managers who are responsible for organizing diagnostics and treatment in the care setting are also absolutely exhausted. They have not really had a break properly since the supposed end of the first wave. So it's really important when we do manage to get time with people that we use that time very effectively and efficiently. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how you might prepare your pitch in a minute or two. We've got better treatments. We do understand the disease much better this time around. And already, whilst we're starting to admit more people into our hospitals, the death rates are not comparable with the first wave, particularly around April, where it really did get to a serious situation. But overall, I think the biggest problem, dilemma even, that we have here in the United Kingdom right now is public frustration with the capability of the government to deal with this properly. And that's manifesting itself in all sorts of different ways. And it's probably one of the reasons why it's going to be very difficult to enforce local lockdowns this second time around. We have done some good things that have been very successful and have catalyzed the development, in particular, of digital health over the last 6 months. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in a minute or two. But primary care has certainly embraced the idea of using digital health for virtual consultations by video. If you go back 6 months, there was no more than 8 to 10% of total consultations in primary care were being undertaken by that means. Now it's towards 85, 86% even, we're told. The same in outpatients. So these are patients who've had treatment in a hospital. They're going back for a checkup. We call those people outpatients. And again, that's been transformed by the advent of digital health technology to conduct remote consultations. The key here is, right now, if you're sitting on digital health technologies, digital health systems, means by which patients can interact with clinicians in a more efficient manner, particularly around elective surgery, cancer diagnostics, mental health and such like. There is an enormous appetite in the NHS to hear your story. So I'm just trying to make that clear. A quick word, if you are a supplier of PPE, the market is awash with the stuff. The trouble is the quality control is not necessarily kept pace with the demand, and there's a lot of skepticism around potential new suppliers of PPE. So unless you've got manufacturing systems certification, quality systems certification, and an enlightened approach to providing information about all of that, then going to be very difficult for you to get a hearing. Okay, all right, let me move on. The other point that I want to really raise, and this is fundamental, is around workforce. So even before COVID, we already had something approaching 60,000 vacancies for nurses in the health service. I'm uncertain what the precise numbers was in respect of doctors, but certainly in primary care, it was felt that we were short of at least 6,000 primary care doctors. So workforce and means by which your product, system, service, whatever it may be, can help people who work in the health service to be more effective in terms of doing what they do on a daily basis. That is absolutely gold dust at the moment. I've already talked about digital health. If you've got systems and processes for helping to manage population health data, this is the receipt of live data around social, economic prevalence within the communities on a very local level. If you've got clever systems that can help with that, there's a lot of interest in that kind of activity to try to stop people becoming sick in the first place. There is also a huge commitment to service redesign right now, as you might expect, given that we've moved to a digital health market. And there is a long-term plan that I'm going to speak about in a moment or two. And if you're in the business of social care products, so these are products to do with helping people who are perhaps discharged from hospital and now need some extra care in their own homes to be looked after, again, that's another sweet spot. It's worth talking just very quickly to make clear that in the United Kingdom, long-term conditions, so these are things like diabetes, hypertension, problems caused by obesity and such like, they take 75% of the annual NHS budget. 18 million of our 60 million or so population are diagnosed as having a long-term condition. Nearly 1 million people diagnosed as living with dementia. The experts tell us there could be double that again who are as yet undiagnosed. Elective surgery and cancer wait lists. Well, look, I've just included this little graph for you here. Wait list size over time with the effect of COVID-19 built in. So you can see, I hope, on the graph there, that between 2016 and 2020, wait lists did increase a little bit, but look, whoosh, up it goes, because hospitals had to close to elective surgery at the beginning of COVID. Cancer diagnostics were not being done nearly as effectively as before. So you can see that wait list issue is a massive one for the NHS to try to resolve, even if COVID didn't exist at all right now. It's only going to get worse, I fear. Okay, that's enough on that. Let's move on to the next bit, if I may. I want to talk to you about your own knowledge. So if you're serious about coming into this market, I don't think it's sensible at all for you to rely on my knowledge or the knowledge of distributors that you may appoint, or even other people with whom you may associate, if you really want to know what's going on. This is required reading if you're going to come in with a product or service into the United Kingdom. It's freely available. If you do a Google search for NHS long-term plan, you will find it. This was published about 2 years ago now, but it is the single most important document for you to read because it helps you to understand the landscape around which treatments, diagnoses, and care is being designed in the United Kingdom. It's very important that you pick out some of the key phrases within it so that actually when you're talking to NHS institutions, you can sound properly informed. Luckily, because I'm good at what I do, I've picked out the 5 key elements that you need to know about. Number 1, there is a determination that we will boost out of hospital care. We don't want people sitting in expensive hospitals, using up expensive beds, eating expensive food, and taking expensive treatments. We want to get them out of hospital as quickly as we safely can into their own homes or transition hospitals where they can be effectively treated. That is an enormous part of the long-term plan. And if you have products or services that can help with that, particularly around remote patient monitoring, there is a ready appetite for that. Second thing, we need to redesign and reduce pressure on our emergency services. The big problem we've had is because there's been a bit of a log jam for people to be able to access primary care. People have routinely, if they've got a very, very bad cold, they'll pitch up at the accident and emergency unit and just ask to be seen by somebody. That cannot continue. So there's a huge effort to redesign and reduce the pressure on emergency services by making sure that inappropriate consultations are moved elsewhere. There is a determination to get to diagnose and treat people with a personal care approach. I don't have time to go into that right now, but it means is that we start to treat people based on their individual symptoms rather than groups. The big one, of course, number 4, digitally enabled primary and outpatient care. It was felt that's a 10-year program 2 years ago. Do you know what? If COVID has done anything at all, it's accelerated the adoption of all of that out of necessity. The big thing is, okay, keep the foot on the accelerator. What next? We need your help with your product, systems, services to help us to deal with patients who've got elective surgery needs and or cancer and mental health needs. And I've already talked about population health already. I was going to give you a little bit more of a tip here around some ideas that I've got for you if you're sitting, as I say, in your office in Vienna or Salzburg right now. I want to update you with some tips for you to follow to enable you to actually get ready to access our market. There is no front door to the NHS. You will not find one. You will. I remember well a client many years ago who rang me up because his company in the United States had sent him to find the front door to the NHS, and he'd ended up walking up and down Whitehall, where the Department of Health and Social Care is based, trying to get somebody from there to see him. It doesn't work that way. There are national bodies, and you need to become aware of which national NHS body is appropriate to you. We have organisations like NHS Digital, the Care Quality Commission, National Association of Primary Care, the Royal Colleges, they're very important as well. You've got to find out which national bodies are of a particular importance for your system or service. If you've got a therapeutic product, you also need to understand the clinical pathway that NHS hospitals, primary care, mental health units are obliged by mandate to follow in order to deliver care. And again, if you do a Google search for that kind of NHS clinical pathway and put in your therapeutic area, odds on you will find it. Okay. And then, of course, don't overlook events. The lovely thing about Zoom and the sorts of software that we're using today is that it is very cost effective to put on events that you can attract people to come and take part in very cost effectively. So do please have a think about that. But in my experience, honestly, trying to go national is not the best way for you to enter the UK. My advice is adopt a local strategy where you find some early adopters in trusts and hospitals and primary care establishments, community health, early adopters who are prepared to evaluate your product, have a look at it and give you a completely independent opinion as to whether it has any merit or not. They're not easy to find, but if I may quickly advertise our services, you could do a lot worse than call me and I may well be able to help you out. Okay? The most important piece of advice I can give you this afternoon is as follows. Write this down. Make it easy for the NHS to buy your product. Make it easy for the NHS to buy your product. They don't want complicated professional sales pitches and such like, and great long slide decks that make manifest the glory of your products where they're used elsewhere in the world. No, you need to be humble, open your ears, open your eyes, and see and hear what they're telling you about how they want to buy your product, and then make it easy for them to do that. I'm going to rest there, Christian. As always, something of a gallop, but I do hope that's proved interesting and helpful to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You promised a fabulous, to-the-point presentation, and you definitely delivered. I don't know if that depended on, the quality of my introduction. I will work on it. I don't know what else I'm going to get out of you at our next webinar. In the meantime, John, there's a question that, of course, always comes from people that, operate in the Austrian-German system that you know very well. It's a question of reimbursement for digital, mobile, new technical solutions. Can you give us some insight on that, please?
Yeah, I don't think it's a concern. I don't think you should even prepare for the product to be reimbursed. It will quite simply, the only area in which reimbursement properly works outside of pharmaceuticals now is in primary care, so family doctors. There, if a product is single use for your use only as the patient, then odds on it will be reimbursable through a system that we have here. But for most products and services, it's not reimbursable. You will just reach a deal for it to be bought either by the individual hospitals or NHS centrally, or a system whereby you will create a contract of supply with interested parties. Reimbursement is not typically a big concern unless you have a particular product, single use, that will be prescribed to a patient for them to either take or apply. Then reimbursement does happen, otherwise it's not a factor.
Important, I think an important clarification, because that's a question that we get frequently when people start to think about entering this market. Another one, and coming back to this list of things, of tips and advice that you had at the very end of your presentation. But let's roll the horse from behind once. What are the pitfalls? What is absolutely what needs to be avoided? I know you're going to repeat yourself, but I consider it important enough that you probably do. Huh?
Don't come expecting to do big sales pitches. They don't work. There is, I would go as far as to say it's a huge turn off for people. The way that hospitals, primary care, mental health, community health, social care works, it's all via relationships. So you need to work hard to establish trust first and foremost, that your product actually does what you say it can do. So you get a proper evaluation conducted for it. There's no point in going to a lengthy and highly polished sales pitch before you've done some of that very straightforward and simple proving of your product benefit. Nobody's going to want to sit through a 30-minute, 45-minute pitch from you before you've done that kind of independent evaluation process here in the United Kingdom.
Good. Thank you very much, John. But now a couple of very concrete points. How is medical simulation technology developing due to COVID, to the pandemic?
I think there's a huge appetite. If you've got simulation training, and recently we were privileged to see a 3D system, 3D virtual system where you could actually insert yourself virtually into a surgical operating theatre and watch systems being conducted. We've had over here for a long period of time now the idea of being able to do video consultations and so on for training, for teaching in hospitals, and that, as you might imagine, is still very popular. What I think if you're talking simulation training where you're using sort of latex products to practice surgical procedures on and so on, that's still fine. There's still a market for that, but there are 3 or 4 huge players here who rather dominate that. So if you've just got the odd single product here or there, I think you might find that quite tough, and you might want to do a licensing deal with one of the big product providers rather than trying to do it yourself. Thanks.
Another question was how would you go about identifying hospitals that kind of would be interested in an upgrade of their medical equipment now? Are they all the same, or are there some that you would kind of pinpoint your marketing activities or your sales activities towards, and how would you find them?
Well, I would say this, wouldn't I? But call me, and we can see if we can have you a little helping hand talk with you to start with. But outside of that, the key is don't come here expecting to get endless time with very, very hard pressed staff right now to talk about some kind of elaborate evaluation system that you want to run. Their mind is miles away from that right now. Come in with simple solutions to the problems and challenges that they have right now, along some of the themes that I've already discussed about electives, cancer, mental health, community services. Then we've got a chance. You know, if you've got specific products and you're needing a helping hand to find some early adopters, key opinion leaders, that kind of stuff, I'd be privileged to help you with that.
One very last, very specific, are there restrictions or things to consider if you approach a physician in a hospital directly? Do you need to inform or contact the hospital's administration prior to reaching out to an individual?
No, you don't. No, you can go straight, you can contact people independently. Many of them, if they are innovation positive, will be delighted to hear from you. If you've got an interesting product or a new innovation that they think might be able to help them. Tracking them down is another thing, and you will not get into the hospitals at the moment because most of them are barring visitors from crossing the threshold unless you have a very, very, very good reason for being there.
Very well. John, thank you very much. This brings us to the end of our time budget. I appreciate your insight. I appreciate your advice and your making yourself available. We had numerous remarks on the chat function saying fantastic presentation. Before our viewers go overboard, I will close it here with the UK portion, and will before handing over to our colleagues in the old colonies, tell you a little bit about what's coming up here on the webinar program from Abbey Studios in London: the death of cash, cybersecurity, positive computing, and Baustelle Brexit. For all of you that are in the wrong place of doing business in the next coming weeks and months. Online, there's a couple of things to be enjoyed on our YouTube channel: MedTech innovations in the UK, flexible working, corporate social responsibility, branding in times of crisis, corporate learning, and many more. With that, it's goodbye from John and me here from London, and we hand over to our colleagues in New York, and hope to see you soon in person.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christian. A warm welcome also from my side from New York. My name is Daniel Mörtel. I'm the Technology and Innovation Officer at the Austrian Trade Commission, Advantage Austria, im Außenwirtschaftszentrum here in New York. I am briefly just introducing you to the US part of our webinar today and give you a quick overview of the agenda for the next half hour or so. And I will shortly hand over to one of my colleagues, namely the Austrian Trade Commissioner, Michael Friedl, in a second. And I will just say 2 words about the agenda. As I mentioned, our Austrian Trade Commissioner for the US here in New York, Michael Friedl, will give a brief intro and overview about the state of the US. And then we will pass on to our expert speakers about the health sector in the US, namely Tal Eidelberg and Nicole Sheehy. Both are from Intrigma. Tal is the founder and CEO of Intrigma, and Nicole is the Director of Operations. And afterwards, we will conclude with a brief Q&A session to respond to hopefully as many questions as we have time for that you are posing to us. And with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Michael, who will say a few words about the state in the US. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning from New York, and thank you, Daniel, and thank you to our colleagues in London. It's a rainy and dreary Tuesday morning here in New York. It's more like London weather than New York weather, I have to say. And it's exactly 3 weeks before Election Day on the 3rd of November, when there will be a decision made between the incumbent Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I just want to use maybe 5 minutes to talk a little bit about the COVID situation here in the United States, the economy, and how Austria is doing. So when we look at the COVID situation, which you will see on the next slide, you see that the US is still the #1 in the world, unfortunately, talking about COVID infections, but also fatalities. In the past, this has grown a little bit. What you can see is that some of the hot spots, the dark red spots, are actually in so-called swing states or battleground states, which is maybe politically also very interesting, because when you look at Wisconsin or Iowa or North Carolina or Florida, these are some of the states that will determine who the next president will be. So there will be maybe questions asked about, being able to vote, is it safe to vote, etc., etc. On the next slide, you will see that the COVID situation on the left side has been a ride, up and down ride. I wouldn't say a joy ride, but an up and down ride. At the beginning, obviously, in March and April, the US was affected very highly. Then during the next couple of months, the cases went down until when the reopening happened in certain states. The cases went up again, went down, etc., etc. So we're not doing too well in that respect. And if you look at the right side, you will see that, as I said at the beginning, some of the cases and some of the regions have shifted regarding COVID. Whereas New York here was an epicenter in March and April at the beginning of the crisis and the pandemic, they've done pretty well in the past couple of weeks and months. Whereas in the Midwest or in the Southeast, where there's also a lot of Austrian companies that are headquartered there, the cases, due to also the economic opening, have increased. Talking about the economy, obviously, it's a healthcare crisis, but obviously it's also a huge economic crisis. I don't want to bore you too much with figures, but obviously the first half of this year was not a very good year for the United States, especially the second quarter, where GDP shrank by more than 30%. So we expect a recession for the whole year. Some optimists say it might only be between 3 and 4%. Some of them say it might be up to 6%. It might be lower than in Europe. But of course, there will be a recession depending on when the states will reopen and how many companies will survive actually the pandemic. We had a record high national debt, far beyond the 100% of GDP, and of course a budget deficit that was nearly tripled during this year, up to close to $3 trillion US. That's close to the GDP of our friends in the United Kingdom. That's only the budget deficit in the United States. Consumer confidence has been going up and down. When some of the states reopened shortly before summer, consumer confidence was going up, especially in retail. That has been going down again in August and September. So we are watching this very closely. But fortunately, some of the industrial investments in companies, in industrial equipment, they have been postponed, but they're slowly picking up again. What I think is, especially before the elections, what's making people a little bit uncomfortable is they don't know what's going to happen with government stimuli. We had nearly $3 trillion being spent on support for unemployed people, for small and medium-sized companies, for the healthcare sector. But because of the elections now, Congress is divided. Congress is not in accordance with the White House. So we might not expect certain further stimuli for people before the election, or maybe even before the 20th of January next year, which is the inauguration date. Unemployment has been extremely high, especially in April, May, June, where it reached up to 16–17%. That went down in the last couple of weeks, below 10%. That is a bit encouraging, but some of the jobs will be lost forever, and some people just have given up looking for a job or entered retirement or are underemployed. So also these figures have to be seen with, unfortunately, a grain of salt. Talking about the elections, as you know, as I said, exactly 3 weeks from now, and you will see this on the next slide, we will have elections in the United States. The incumbent President Donald Trump against Joe Biden, former vice president. I think the questions that it will boil down to is who can handle a crisis better? And I'm not just talking about a crisis in a pandemic or a health crisis, but of course also an economic crisis, a political crisis. Who can jumpstart the economy faster? A lot of people are also asking the question, who is tougher on China, who is seen as a little bit of the culprit of the virus, but is also an enemy in certain trade wars. And as I also said at the beginning, who will be able to vote? Who can register? Who can have access to polling stations and voting stations? What's going to happen with some of the mail-in votes, etc., etc. And in the end, who will preserve the American dream better? Although the definition maybe of the American dream might have changed over the past couple of months. Talking about Austria in the United States, how are we doing in the United States? Obviously, the first half of this year was also negative for us, especially when we're talking about imports from the United States that nearly declined by 27%, exports by only I should say 16%. It also reflects that the range of goods and services that we export to the United States is wider and maybe a bit less affected by certain declines in certain industries than the other way around, but obviously it's a negative result. But we see encouraging signs in bilateral trade. So in the past couple of months, the minuses have grown a little bit smaller. The investments from the Austrian side are still strong. We haven't heard from companies that are pulling out. They might maybe delay certain investments, but just next month, we're going to be visiting, or end of this month, we're going to be visiting one of the biggest investments in North Carolina, a wood processing factory from Austria that invested $500 million. So these are encouraging signs, and they show that Austrian companies on the long term have a positive and optimistic outlook on the development in the United States. We also see this, that business travel is increasing with all the problems and travel restrictions, but we can help. So if you want to travel to the United States or from the other side to Austria, we can maybe give you some advice on how to do this during COVID times. We've also seen a shift in our daily work, obviously I should say, forward to the digital world, more webinars like this, more other formats, different types of questions. And we started, I just want to keep it like that, we started a podcast called The Sound of Business, which you can download. You will see it on the next slide. That is one of our maybe highlights of the past weeks, where we interview successful Austrian companies and Americans who support Austrian companies, and how did they battle the COVID crisis, and how did they make it maybe even an economic success. So this is it from my side. Thank you very much for tuning in also to the American part of this presentation. And I would just like to hand over to Tal Eidelberg and Nicole Sheehy from Intrigma, who will introduce themselves and who are our experts on the healthcare sector in the United States. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Tal Eidelberg. I am the founder and CEO of Intrigma. I have an engineering background and a military background prior to that. I founded the company about 16 years ago. Today, we prepared a good show for you. We are going to talk a little bit about what Intrigma does as a software company that provides an IT solution to hospitals, specifically a scheduling software solution. We're going to talk about compliance and the importance of compliance in the sales process. It's a critical thing that could delay sales cycles. You're probably familiar, may have heard things like the Healthcare Affordability Act, or HIPAA. And then we're going to give you tips on how to commercialize. We want to, we're doing this because we want to meet you. We hope you succeed. We're happy to talk about partnerships, and we're also doing it because the nice guys at Advantage offered me a Hefeweizen if I do a good job here. So you'll be the judges of that at the end. Okay, we provide a scheduling solution, a way to centralize the shift work for a healthcare organization. For example, which physician works on which assignment, the morning shift, the afternoon shift, the night shift. It's very different for each specialty. So emergency medicine is very different than hospital medicine. And we provide the means to centralize it for a large organization and to meet the various needs. We very recently also added telemedicine, which has just the demand for that has skyrocketed. We don't provide the telemedicine per se in terms of the actual video conferencing, but when you're trying to schedule an individual to cover multiple geographic areas with different licensure requirements, we do a very good job at doing that. Now, the important impact financially that this has is very interesting. At the end of the day, about the U.S. healthcare system is about, the U.S. economy is about 20 trillion, and of that, healthcare spending, as was previously said, is around 18% or 3.6 trillion. Hospital and physician services are about combined are about 53% of that, and in the hospital and physician practice setting, about 60 cents of every dollar is labor. So how much is that? Well, it's a lot of money. Let's just say that if I had that kind of money, I'd invite all my friends for a lot of schnitzel. It's about $1.1 trillion in comparison. And that's, again, what we spend in the United States on labor in healthcare, in hospitals and physician practices. In comparison, the GDP of Austria is 455 billion. So what we spend just on labor in the United States is larger than a lot of European companies entire GDP. So from Intrigma's perspective, we see it as a very important responsibility to make sure that that time, that very expensive time, that line item in our GDP is spent in the most efficient way, that we're not being wasteful with it and that we're being responsible with it. And that's what I guess the highest goal that we're trying to achieve. So before we get into that, we have some very interesting customers, and what you're seeing here are lists of this is a list of organizations that vary from 100 hospital, tens of billion-dollar healthcare systems to telemedicine companies. Some of the folks on this slide here have recently raised 45 million. Others have raised 280 million and already have multi-billion-dollar valuations. What we've seen during the pandemic is actually a very sharp spike in demand for scheduling. As the pandemic took its toll, its unfortunate toll on different departments, and other departments were shut down, staffing and scheduling staff correctly became a very deep need and a very rapidly changing need. We found ourselves working tirelessly hours and hours and hours trying to meet the changing needs, and also growing our market share, particularly in the telemedicine space. There was a very sharp increase. Some of our customers have seen a threefold increase. Now, some of these organizations offer multiple services, from surgery to anesthesia to radiology, a full suite of service of a healthcare system, birth to death. Others do telemedicine, for example, for mental health, or do telemedicine for urgent care. It's like a virtual emergency department, you could think of it. Others have walk-in clinics where COVID testing became the #1 product that they're selling. And in fact, some of them just here in New York City today are rolling out rapid testing for the first time. But it has been quite an interesting ride, and I would say that there are enormous opportunities right now for anybody who could assist with this. And actually, there's a sharp increase in investments for various reasons, because investors are looking for the most exciting opportunities, and the healthcare sectors tends to hold up really, really well in recessions, and the need in healthcare could not be any more pronounced. So with that, we're going to transition to the second part, where we're going to give you some tips about commercializations and how it is that you can gain traction, increase your traction, close some deals in the United States. So the first and most important thing to understand to close deals is the requirements that any IT, and again, we don't do pharmaceuticals, we don't do medical devices, but I would say that similar regulations, or even stricter ones, exist for physical devices, but we have more responsibility for data security and data confidentiality. And even though we provide scheduling software, it does not really contain much electronic medical data, or EPHI, electronic protected health information, as it's formally called. We still are subject to certain requirements. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nicole Sheehy. Nicole is with Intrigma and has put together the policies and the compliance for us here. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thanks, Tal. Hi, my name's Nicole. I'm the Director of Operations at Intrigma. I'm also an attorney. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about our security policies, but first I do want to say something really quick. I actually lived in Würzburg, Germany for about a year because my husband played professional basketball there. And while I was there, I learned that I have a favorite dessert, and I thought it was German at the time, but I actually found out that that German dessert was actually Austrian, and it's Kaiserschmarrn, and I'm probably saying that wrong, but it is so good. So I had to bring that up today when I knew I was speaking to an Austrian audience. So with that being said, back to the serious stuff. Intrigma, like Tal said, is a staffing scheduling solution that handles which providers work which shifts. So we don't hold any patient data. However, we are still held to some certain regulatory standards by healthcare institutions to protect their data. Some organizations require us to undergo security assessments, before they purchase, in which they audit our security policies and procedures. Certain certifications will actually get you approved without any of these assessments. It will speed up a really lengthy sales cycle. And those certifications are called SOC 2 Type 2 and High Trust. We actually don't have either of those yet, but we plan to get High Trust certified in the next 2 years. So our policies comply with NIST recommendations, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology recommendations. And just a few of the policies that we are frequently asked about are on the slide. It's business continuity and disaster recovery. This one talks about how your organization handles disaster, such as like COVID, and how you plan to manage that under this disaster. The next one is change management. Basically, whenever you have any major changes to an infrastructure, the vendor wants to know how you will handle it and what processes you have in place to make sure the change isn't harmful. The next one is incident response. This one is the process that you have in place for responding to an incident. And this incident is probably going to be something along the lines of a data breach. The next one is data retention policies. This policy addresses how long your organization will hold the data and the method in which the data will be deleted. The next one is the risk management process. This one explains the process that your organization will utilize to minimize any identified risks. Access management policy. This one is the process around who accesses sensitive data and how they're given such access. And the last one is password policy. This just includes like the length of your password requirements, character requirements, and how frequently you require changes to your passwords. We have many more policies, but these are just some of the most frequently requested policies from our vendors. So if you guys have any questions, just let us know afterwards. And back to Tal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. So selling in the United States, what is the best way to get in? And I'll echo some of the things that my colleague from the UK mentioned, and that is you want to be valuable. You want to solve a problem that they are having right now. And I think that the first part of that is, I would say, find a champion. Don't try. Often individuals would approach somebody from procurement, and that person may or may not be the right person. Procurement usually has to walk you through the process, but unless you have somebody who's in a position of clinical leadership, or rather is suffering from this, is a decision maker who's suffering personally from the problem that you have a solution for, it's going to be very hard to get things going. Sales presentations, sitting through long meetings, they really don't have time or patience. I sit in meetings with people, their phone is blowing up. And the beautiful thing is, these are very nice people. They committed their life to helping save patients' lives. If they like what you do, they're generally going to try to help you and get you into other places. So customer testimonials or street credibility and traction is critical. And make sure that you do a good job. Come with a reasonable offer. Be very patient with them. If they cancel, if they don't show up, it happens all the time. It's not because you're not important. It's because they have patients that have emergencies. That's what I've learned. Very humbling process. The second point I would have is, in this day and age, have a very clear articulation of your value proposition and do an ROI analysis. Everybody's looking at the bottom line, and you need to make sure that you can deliver that. And then the last thing I would say is, this is a very interesting market that they truly, they take care of patients. We're not selling ads to market, Coca-Cola bottles, not to take anything away from them. But at the same time, it's very important to come in with just a humble mindset of, how can I be valuable to this healthcare organization in doing its mission, holistically, both in what is it I'm doing and my commitment to them, but also financially. How can I make sure that I do this at the right price to help them? Because at the end of the day, they serve patients, and we have a responsibility to those patients. And I would say that another market penetration strategy, two market penetration strategies that work really well is you could find a partner that already has the customers and already has the certifications, and you can figure out how to integrate with them and do a joint go-to-market strategy. I'm sure some of you have considered that, certainly, in this meeting and in these sort of circles when you're trying to do business as a foreign entity. The second one is some of these healthcare organizations have their own venture capital or investment or innovation arm. While we have never taken that route, you could actually go and they have a mandate to invest only in things that the healthcare system executives are genuinely interested in, and that's a great way to get just time with the decision makers and to get from the top down to the actual people who do the work. And you will find often that even if you get into the top, they will go to their champions they're actually boots on the ground doing the work and form a group or advisory committee as to evaluate, is this a need and is this something that we need to do. So with that, I'll hand it back to the Advantage guys, and thank you very much for listening. We hope it was helpful.
Hi, Tal. Thank you very much. We are almost out of time, but I would like to ask you if you can maybe share a little bit more about how you guys manage to score some of those big clients. Like, how can you partner as a small company, relatively small company? How can you partner up with, I saw CDMD, Kaiser Permanente, those big guys in the US. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, how that works, how you get in touch.
It takes years. It takes years of persistence in a sales effort. The sales cycles have not been short. They're speeding up a lot more now because I think the timing for our solution has just happened to be at the peak of it. But in general, the sales cycles are pretty prolonged. You need to have some sort of relationship with the champions. I think that's the most important thing that you can have. The way you get that, for us, for example, it was just to call them and persist in a polite and gentle but very, very consistent manner until we get the meeting, and then explain why it is that we have a differentiated value specifically for their needs. Some of the customers, we had to wait until something else didn't quite work for them, and then they came to us and they said, look, this is really isn't working for me. But the idea is to get their ear. Back in when we started, when we were significantly smaller and had fewer customers, it was very important to go to conferences and trade shows and meet the market and try to get meetings with individuals and understand who the influential folks are, the opinion leaders, and get their opinion and make sure that we have advisors involved that could introduce us to folks that'll sit down and listen to our story, and then do a case study. The customers who do suffer from some sort of inefficiency and you're going to help solve their problem, not everybody, some of them don't even allow you to talk about them, but others would be more than happy to do a press release with you or something of that nature. So if you do a success story, that tends to hit the news, and you'll get people's ear that way. But just as any business, I believe word of mouth has been very kind to us, and it's still, if you do genuinely a good job and you come with the right attitude and you're really committed and you go through the difficult times and the good times together with your customers in a committed way, the word of mouth is there's nothing quite like a chief medical officer. There's only 5,000 hospitals, for example, in the US, managing trillions of dollars, literally. So when a CEO or chief medical officer of one of these hospitals calls a friend of theirs and says, look, I used these guys for a few years, no questions asked, this is the best solution that I've ever used. You can't pay for that, so basically do a good job and take care of your customers.
Okay, I think we have only 1 minute left. I wanted to talk a little bit because there's a question about the insurance system. Obviously that's very complex, and reimbursement. Maybe you can touch on that very briefly, but again, we'll have to wrap it up in a minute. Unfortunately, we're running a little late.
Reimbursement insurance, is there a specific question?
Well, the question was who was paying for the product, right? So if you sell to the hospital, or if the insurance companies are paying, etc.
Yeah, we serve the direct users are provider organizations, ones that provide the care, So folks that employ physicians and employ nurses and employ advanced practitioners in allied health, they pay directly usually out of their operating budget. In the case that an insurance plan owns these practices, which is not the majority, but some of our customers are both a provider and an insurance company, the money would sometimes come from the insurance. The insurance does not have to have an ICD code or to get doesn't need to be a reimbursement element for the providing organization. They generally buy it out of their operational budget as an administrative IT enterprise tool.
Makes sense. Sorry that we have to cut it short here. We're out of time, unfortunately. One quick note, we'll host a virtual business mission about human technology in Minnesota in November, and I'd be happy if many of you guys joined us for that. Thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you from my side, from our side here in New York, as well as from our colleagues in the UK. Thank you for attending, and please contact us if you have any additional questions about today's presentation. Thank you very much.